today we're quite lucky and I'm excited to introduce Björn. Björn Jeffery is our speaker of the morning. He's from here in San Francisco, so it wasn't too bad of a commute. He's the co-founder and CEO of Toca Boca Studios, which makes digital toys for kids, which I love the idea of digital toys, not apps. Let's take that away. It's a toy. It's fun. I love Toca Boca, or I love Toca Taylor Fairy Tales. That's one of my favorite apps. Their apps are filled with whimsy and fun, and it's great company for kids. On the personal side, he started a few blogs. Sorry, I stopped you a little bit. He started a few blogs with his friends. One is manilo.se, is that how you say it? And I'm terrible with my own language. And he has a music blog called discobell.net. And a mock blog called Being Taylor Blue. That's awesome. Or Tyler Blue, sorry. Since its product launch in 2011, Toca Boca has released 28 apps that have been downloaded in 215 countries worldwide. With over 90 million downloads to date, Björn will discuss how you build a successful company that remains innovative and creative as it grows. Please welcome our speaker of the day, Björn Jeffery, as he shares the kids' perspective, building a digital brand that lasts.
Give everyone a minute to get seated. So yeah, good morning. It's being Tyler Brûlé, like the editor-in-chief of Monocle. Not Tyler Blue. If anyone's read Monocle, you know it's a bit of a parody in itself, so that's worth taking a look at. Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome. Thanks for having me back. As mentioned, I'm Björn Jeffery. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Toca Boca. The commute was short because I live in San Francisco, but originally from Sweden, which is a little bit longer. And Sweden is sort of the heart and where the whole company started. Almost 5 years ago, I started doing research in 2010, the autumn, in Stockholm, me and my co-founder. We are the #1 mobile-first kids brand. And we actually just passed 100 million downloads, which is the first time I think we're sort of talking about officially. 28 apps, and it's about 4 years of sort of operations. First app came out in March 16th, I think it was, 2011. And it's been quite a ride. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about some sort of key decisions that we made that I think has really shaped the company to what it's become today. Also want to mention, because I realized that a lot of people don't know necessarily that we have a sister studio called Sega Mini. And I think a lot of you may have seen Sega Mini's apps in the App Store, but not know that they're affiliated with us. So Jason Crow and I actually met at a conference quite a few years ago and decided that we should sort of combine forces and go from what was then the Tickle Tap apps and turn that into something which is called Sega Mini. So that's just our sister studio. So 3 early choices that I thought I could share, and I think it's interesting to tell the story from that perspective because they're not very obvious, although they may seem so now. And I guess in a way that's how a lot of things come across afterwards. Everyone can see the smartphone in retrospect, and everyone can see the App Store and what a genius move it was to open that up to third-party developers. But at the time, it really wasn't, and there was a lot of things that were sort of going in the opposite direction, actually. And I think as I was thinking this through, I thought about these things in the same way. While it feels supernatural to me now, and you know, like good, solid decisions, at the time it was a bit of a bet. And maybe there's a lesson in there somewhere. I'm hopefully going to get to that. But I'm going to talk about how we design products. I'm going to talk about company values. I'm going to talk about the choice of business model, which I imagine is something which is on the top of a lot of people's minds here. So, starting off with the design approach, sort of talking about the design. So, this is in 2010. The word on everybody's lips and sort of all the trend work, because that's what I used to do before, sort of looking at sort of what's the future of TV, what's the future of books, what's the future of magazines and all those things. At the time, was just gamification. There's just ways of sort of basically creating incentives for people to do things that they otherwise might not have done, or staying on a little bit longer, or doing a little bit more of something that they might not have done. And this was added absolutely everywhere. There was books being written, TED Talks being spoken, all sorts of things about just how can we sort of gamify the world to make it a better place. If you looked at sort of the top 10 paid iPhone apps at the time, everything was games. Things that's still around for that matter, like Doodle Jump and Angry Birds, was sort of, they were the ones that did it very well. So we looked at this and sort of so obviously saw the trend, but there's this sort of key thesis in trend work that it's not a trend unless there's also a counter trend. And that's sort of almost one of the definitions of it being a trend is that something is going against the grain. And what we saw is at the time is I think a lot of people were trying to capture sort of very traditional gaming patterns from the consoles just on a small screen. Nothing wrong with that necessarily, but there's also, we're just overlooking a completely different area, which was the non-gaming side. So I think the choice for us was sort of to go in a complete different direction and sort of do not gamification, or un-gamification, as I'm going to talk about soon. Because it's thought about it from a kid's perspective, and that's sort of how we try to approach things. And we think that, while there's nothing wrong with competition, chances that kids are going to go through life without getting a fair dose of competition is pretty slim. Like, it's going to show up sooner or later anyway, and there's no risk you're going to grow up in modern society without having a healthy dose of competition. However, if you look at the sort of the time spent in play, while games is a very strong category, toys is a very, very strong category as well, and why toys haven't really been digitized in the same manner. I think a lot of it because it was attributed to the physical toys' sort of attributes and what was necessary in order to have a toy-like experience. But that's not necessarily what defines a toy, it's more sort of how you engage with it and what it does for you. So we started about thinking, well, maybe we should just look at these attributes of very, very successful toys and see how can we apply them in the digital space. Now, a lot of them obviously were not going to be converted very well. Has anyone played the Frisbee apps? There are Frisbee apps, they're not very good. And the reason is, like, the Frisbee isn't a very, isn't a play pattern that really lends itself to digitization very well. It's just this flying object. But the fun thing about the Frisbee isn't that something is flying, because then anything flying would be fun. It's what you do with it physically. So there's a lot of these things that very, very successful toys traditionally have had, which have been very, very hard to digitize. On the other hand, there's also a lot of characteristics which can be adjusted and not even just sort of barged into the screen, but actually make the most out of the screen and do something which is quite different, but while still sort of maintaining that core play pattern. This is a quote that I've read a few times, I think, but it's really nice. And it's just about un-gamification, and it says, as they grow older, American children have lost their natural and spontaneous love of playing. Instead, they have forgotten how to enjoy the game with their focus on winning. There's something very sort of profound in that. And again, I don't think it's not fair and it's not useful to completely polarize things and say that there should never be any competition. But I think there's room for other things as well. It's just, and we saw this space. So for us, what that means is we removed all levels. Right? So there's no levels, there's no way to get anywhere in the app itself. We removed all high scores. We removed all scores, even at all, so there's no leaderboard or anything. And while removing all winners, you automatically also remove all losers. So you just play. You play for the sake of playing. I think in this audience, in this context, that's probably maybe slightly taken for granted, although looking at the products, at least in the App Store, it's not immediately obvious that this is something which has really hit home. I think what's come as a nice little consequence of this is as well as we've designed it in a very open-ended manner so that children can basically play with it in whatever way they want to, it's been really recognized by the special needs community. Got a lot of response from parents that have kids on the autistic spectrum saying that for the first time they can play with the same toys as their siblings without feeling that they're doing it the wrong way, because there is no right way of doing it. However you want to play with it is the way you can do it. This of course means that we have play designers instead of game designers. It's essentially the same kind of role, but the focus and the intent with what they're doing is actually quite different. And we've developed this sort of a rubric almost of sort of what we think are A, sort of play experiences that we think can be digitized in a good manner, and B, things that we think that we as a company, as Toca Boca, actually does really well. Because, yeah, as mentioned, there's a lot of things going that you could be doing, but we decided to focus and just so that we can also learn and apply those learnings from every single app into the next one. So the three areas that we work with is role-playing, and sort of imaginative play from that sense. We work with creative and manipulative play, which is sort of drawing, painting, constructing, building, that kind of thing. And then we work with exploratory and experimental play, which is just unexpected outcomes. What happens if you dive into something and look behind that? What are you going to find? Those kind of things. And all of our apps over the last few years, in the beginning, if you look at the portfolio, it's pretty obvious, we're a little bit all over the place. We're also trying to run, I think I had a team of 7, and I was trying to make 30 apps in a year. I'd never made an app before I started this company. Needless to say, that did not work, but I managed to get 10 out the door, which is, under the circumstances, completely amazing. Given that I'm releasing maybe 4 or 5 this year. But anyway, it was, with the exception of the first apps, which was just sort of like trying to lay the land and figure out, what are we doing? After that, this little rubric is starting to take shape, and you can see a very sort of clear theme when you look at our products, that we are building on each other and picking up on just learnings and findings that we've found from each place. And I think that has been very, very useful in us to just like tune and gradually get a little bit better from every product. It's just not taking on too many of these challenges from the beginning. Of course, the play design is also responsible for sort of keeping the kids' perspective throughout the design process, which means everything from just testing a lot with kids. We test, generally speaking, with sort of paper prototypes or physical toys from the beginning, very, very far from the digital experience, just to try to find what's the heart of this, what's the core, almost, if you will, of this experience, and then see, is that translatable or not? Then we build a prototype, and we go back and we test that. Just recently we cancelled the whole prototype after spending sort of 2 months on it because it just wasn't fun enough, basically, and it's as simple as that. And we've done that on many occasions, and while it's expensive and annoying and frustrating and everything, it is better, especially for the brand in the long run, than putting out products that aren't sufficiently good. And it's just, the kids will tell you, if you're willing to listen and you're sort of open enough for that, then the kids, they'll let you know if they don't think it's good enough. And when they did, we had no other chance than just to shut that down. But just some examples of how we're taking this on. This is our latest app, Toca Life City. It's just a virtual dollhouse, essentially, which is in a very, very classic play pattern, which has been around for many, many years, in very many different iterations as well, even digitally. So this idea of sort of playing in an open-ended house. So previous to this we had Toca Town, which was sort of more the home environment. Toca City now is something which is more the weekend, going to the mall, shopping, going to the theatre, those kind of things. And this is turning into a little series, which we're going to call Toca Life. But it's intrinsically a dollhouse-like play pattern, and we think this actually lends itself very well to being digitized. Without having to add any of these gamified mechanics. It's just completely unnecessary for that to really work. One of the older apps, this is actually the first and or second, depending how you want to see it. They were simultaneously released apps that we released called Toca Tea Party, which was sort of taking this sort of old pretend play idea of just this classic tea set, but also thinking that while the device is interesting and the screen is interesting, everything in the play experience doesn't necessarily have to take place within the confines of the screen. So think about that. It's sort of like, I think it's been so focused, and I think there's a few examples here and there of nice things of just using the screen as part of the play, as opposed to the play itself. And in this case, it's just really a synthesizer of this kind of play. And you can do it without a screen for sure, but it sort of adds little sort of sound effects, and what came out of testing, which is by far the most popular feature of the app, is that you spill a lot of tea. Not something that parents generally think is fantastic, but in a digital setting, this is proven to be a great advantage over the physical equivalent of spilling tea all the time. And it works really well, but it's just as much about playing with your sort of dolls, teddy bears, siblings, parents, grandparents, as it is about staring into a screen, which by now is getting such a bad rep for all sorts of kind of strange reasons. It's something quite different, and I think the kids get it, and parents, once they see it, they tend to get it as well. And that's one other sort of way. Again, completely without game mechanics, just totally open, but adding a few sort of sparkles of things that maybe the original set did not have. Finally, just the third example is Toca House, which is household chores. Again, not a topic which is super popular necessarily, at least not doing it in the way that the parents have intended them to be done. But the idea of sort of helping out in the house is, of course, very familiar, and also something which has been around for a very long time, something which is great fun. And this is the same thing. It has just takes on familiar themes. Well, in this case, you're sort of vacuuming up some dust, and while that can be finished, you can play that over again if you want to. Like there's no, you don't have to do it in a specific order. You can play the same thing over and over. You can make your own little story and narrative around why these things are happening. And actually, as a sort of conscious design decision in the un-gamification style, this, after you've done, I think it's 10 activities, the sun sets. And it's time to go to bed, and all the characters, they fall asleep. And while you can play it again, that is also like a natural rounding off point in the app, so that parents can say, okay, they've gone to bed, it's time for us to go to bed, it's time for us to do something else. Whereas the idea of gamification would be the complete opposite. Like, how can I hook on these kids or these users so that they just basically keep on going, keep on playing forever, longer sessions and more frequent sessions. And that's not necessarily a good experience. And in this case, certainly wasn't the kind of experience that we were looking for. So that about the sort of the design approach itself. So let's talk a little bit about values. So in the game and the toy context, it's very hard to look past just the context in which we're in. And as I mentioned, I'm Swedish, or it's even more complicated. I'm half English and a quarter Norwegian and a quarter Swedish, but I live in America, so it's complicated. But there's a Scandinavian sort of heritage to this as well, where I think gender equality has actually come much further than it has in large parts of the world. And this was just an issue that I think a lot of people on the team, including myself, were just seeing that there's going to be a new type of parent that's going to look at their own kids growing up and saying, I wonder if they really need to be shaped and formed in this very, very strong manner from such an early age. Maybe I should just let my kids play with whatever they want to play with, maybe not predetermine that. And if that ends up being sort of all girls going for pink dolls, then so be it. But it would be nice if at least they had an option. But this is the way, and this is the context that we're in. And we're very sort of cognizant of that. If I'd launched Toca Boca into the physical toy space, I most likely would not be standing there today. Because there's no chance I could have gotten on these shelves, because this is the way it looks. It's very, very heavily gendered, and we design all our products to be unisex. They are for kids. They're not for boys, they're not for girls, and to be honest, I don't know how they skew. I don't have that data, I haven't found out. I don't really care, to be perfectly honest. I care about making a product which doesn't actively exclude children. So then what they're into, and whatever that may be, I think horse riding is the most interesting example. It's just an anomaly in the world where taking care of horses is traditionally seen as very sort of skewing towards girls and women. But you look at professional horse riding, it's almost only men. So there's a lot of these just anomalies going on in the world where you just accept that this is something which is very, very natural. The thing is, it's not. In 1975, 70% of toys showed no markings of gender whatsoever. So this is a relatively late construct, actually, and the idea that just kids naturally glide to one side and the other, well, that's not entirely true. I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I'm sure that they're selling a lot of stuff, but there is also another way of doing it. But I think the sheer retail environment that we're entering into would have been very hard for us to launch into, given what we had. But there's no pink and there's no blue app store, which is nice. So in this case, we just launched into the kids category, or in that case at the time, the education category. And you can just start sort of thinking about, well, suddenly we have a possibility to do something here which we couldn't have done if we'd gone the more traditional route, and we should make the most out of that. We think that toys is just one of many very impactful things in kids' lives, and it's a responsibility that we should take very seriously. It's not necessarily one, again, at the time, seeing the context, and you look at sort of what are toys that sell really well, and what are things that do really well. Going for a gender-neutral approach is not the most obvious answer. But the fact is, for us, I should say, it's worked really, really well. This is an app which I hope a lot of you have tried. If you haven't, you should. Take it from someone who knows. It's great. It's Toca Boca. It's also my Twitter avatar. It's a lion that's going in for a haircut. This was certainly not a safe bet from the beginning. Some of you know this was originally called Hairy Hippie Hair Salon in its prototype stage, and was a very, very hairy hippie with a big beard that you had to shave into something which you could recognize as a person. Somehow we greenlit that. I don't know how that happened, and then it ended up being this, thank God, which was a lot better. But you know, this play pattern, lions aside, but the play pattern of taking on hairstyling, just fun with hair basically, it's been around for a very long time. In the physical world, cutting hair on your goal is going to be a very short experience. Once you've done that, it's going to be hard to repeat. Great fun while you're doing it, and then less fun afterwards. Typical example of something where digital can actually do something probably much better from that sense. It's just a matter of like getting the hair right. But if you look at those toys that are in the market, it's very, very clear that sort of this is a girl's toy, and this is the way it should be done. So hair play, whatever that should be called, is for girls. Now, some have then made the assumption that that's how it should be digitized as well, which of course can be done. That's when it looks like the top row. That's just Disney's Royals. It's Disney Royal Salon. Maybe even, I think they've thrown a princess in there as well. And beneath is the sequel to Toca Boca 2, which just has a very, very different look, as you can see. And this is, of course, intentional in terms of sort of the aesthetics as well. It's partly the sort of the colors and the messages that it sends from this sort of gender-neutral perspective. But it's also just an aesthetic, which is like we knew we could never out-Disney Disney. Like, that is a losing battle, and like, there's no point even taking that on. That wasn't the kind of products that we were interested in, that wasn't the aesthetics that we were sort of super into either. But regardless of that, even if that's what we would have wanted, it would have been really, really tricky to do it. And I think these screenshots are just very, very telling that, like, there's another way of doing these things, even if it's not the most obvious one, and even if it's not necessarily, which in this case, present in the market, which it wasn't. I should also say that Toca Boca 2 is, without having perfectly done this, is probably one of the best-selling kids apps of all time, and I think has outsold the top one about 10 times. So that's with Disney, that's with princesses, that's with Disney's marketing and everything. There's still room to do things in a different way, especially in sort of more barren ground, which the App Store actually represents. But we mess up as well from time to time. It's tricky. This is something which is hard to sort of keep your eye on the ball properly. This is a robot from Toca Boca Lab, and you'll see which way this is skewing. And I don't quite know how this ended up happening, but somehow this sort of slipped through the cracks. But compared to the other robots, they look very differently, and it's very clear that this is sending a gendered message. And we were very sort of self-critical, and we went back and we did sort of like an audit of the apps that we've done, and this one was one of the ones that stuck out and said, this is actually not very close to what you're saying that you should be doing. So we took this back to the drawing board and actually redid it, and this is some sketches of just sort of the ideas of what we could be doing instead. And while the first Toca Robot Lab was very much what can you build from stuff in the garage, but that ends up being sort of like an old jar of paint or brushes or cogwheels and that sort of very traditional robot aesthetic. But what if we expand that and think about what can you build in the house in general? And that's where you end up with sort of a hamburger as the middle of the robot. Because why not? And there's very different kind of color schemes and that sort of thing too. And just beads, straws, pencils, everyday items that just work just as well in creating this robot experience, because the app itself is intrinsically the same thing, but isn't really excluding and leading people down a path which is unnecessary, because it doesn't really bring anything to the app itself. We also changed the icon. So to the left is the old icon, and to the right is the new icon. Again, it's just the icon symbolizes very, very clearly who this is for. And the left one probably excluded girls thinking this is not for me, while they might have loved it if they had opened it. And I think, and I hope at least, that the right one is a little bit more open to whoever might think it's fun to play with robots. Now, has it changed? I don't know. But I think at least my conscience is more clear in terms of I've at least created a product that girls don't feel excluded by. And I think that's a good start. So, the business model. Also a choice which was not as controversial then as it is now, because times have changed, as everyone in the audience knows. As a reminder for those of you that don't know, our business model is we have paid apps, we have no in-app purchases, we have no third-party advertising. And we've stuck to this, contrary to trends and everything happening. And there's good reasons for that, and partly it's, I think in-app purchases, while not bad in every possible sort of iteration of it, of course, but a lot of times the way in which it's designed is that it's withholding the fun from kids. It's close, you want to do something, but it's locked, and you've got to unlock that door in order to get that thing which you really, really wanted. And that is sort of like dangling fun in front of kids, and just when they're about to grab it, you just take it back, and then, because then you've got to pay for that. And again, I'm not against paying for software, as you can see, I'm all for it, but there's a time and a place, and there's different ways in which you can do it. Now, there are good ways of implementing in-app purchases as well, at least better, and I don't want to polarize this issue a lot, but for us, having this sort of unbroken play experience for kids is really, really important. And also for parents to feel like once they're lending their device to their kids, that it doesn't come back with a bill was also a big concern in building this brand. And while the brand itself is from a sheer revenue perspective, taking a hit from not sort of jumping on the bandwagon with everything else, we're taking this to a much, much bigger place. So if I lose trust from parents, I have nothing. If I lose trust from kids, I have nothing. So that also has a price. It's not free to give freebie. It has costs. This is just the top grossing list on iPhone from a few days ago. The one to the left is all apps, and the one to the right is the kids category. As you can see, the ones with circles are the ones that are paid. Everything else is other versions of either in-app purchases or subscriptions, maybe even some ads in the middle of these things. So you can see it's not been the most profitable decision necessarily to do this, and this needs to be taken into account, and you need to sort of see what that really means. So, when looking at this and when thinking about, and I'm sure a lot of people here, as have I, thought, how do we sort of either create and or maintain a very sort of sustainable business then when things are looking the way it does. So one idea which of course comes up is like, well, maybe we should switch to freemium. Maybe we should just go all freemium and let's see what that would end up doing. I think while that is sort of tempting and alluring, there are a lot of things to indicate that it's much, much harder than simply just switching something over to freemium. I think the best example is Angry Birds Stella. How many have played with this? It is ironically, it's the app which was intended to challenge gender stereotypes by making a pink bird, which is exactly the same game as the one that we released before. Can't really see the challenge there, but there you go. So this is something that they went from the original. Angry Birds was originally a paid app. They made this now into a freemium app instead. This is the grossing ranking for that app up until today. And this is Angry Birds, the most successful mobile games franchise in the world. It fell off very, very early, and down below there's these little grey marks. They're updates to the app. So this isn't a dead app. These are apps that have kept on going, they've kept on investing in them, and you can't even find them on the top 1,500 of grossing apps. And what I want to say with this is, freemium is hard. Don't think that just turning the freemium switch on is going to make you a lot of money. Because if Rovio and Angry Birds can't do it, it's going to be tricky. And I think the examples that we see from freemium working really well is when you start with the freemium model. So you start with sort of an acceleration mechanic, like Clash of Clans. I want to build something. It's going to take 8 hours, the access. Oh, that sounds like a lot, but you can also pay 2 gems, and suddenly it'll take 2 seconds. It's artificially prolonging things which aren't there, but that is the core of a lot of freemium mechanics, of just how can I accelerate something which is artificially constrained. That's how you do a good freemium app. However, I don't want to make apps like that. I know that's how you do it, and I think we could probably figure out a way of doing it. I just don't think that's for me. I don't think that's a good fit for my brand, but I think I know how to do it. But what I do know that we cannot do is just turn all of our apps free and hope that people are going to be buying in-app purchases like crazy, because there's a lot to support that is not happening. That's very tricky. Advertising is another option, of course. Apart from the appallingly low CPMs that you would be getting, the sheer volume that you get, that you'd have to sort of really get any money out of the system, your apps start looking like this. And this is not a great product from a kid's perspective. This is not a great product from a parent's perspective. I'd argue that sort of even AT&T, if they knew that their ads were showing up next to sort of Clean the Sink app, that they even would be concerned about the money that they're spending on mobile. This is not very appropriate, and I understand why people do it, and I can sort of see that there's a business to be made, but again, this is not for us. The third one is subscriptions, and that is actually working. I think if you compare the grossing list on all apps to the grossing list on kids' apps, it looks very, very different in terms of the subscriptions. These are all the apps. This is just the top 14 in this case from the other day. It changes a little bit up and down, but generally speaking, this is what it looks like. All the ones within the circle have a subscription component, and if you look at the equivalent list on the all apps, it's almost all regular freemium. There's the odd subscription app in there, Spotify is there, and a few other things. But it looks very, very different. So just like, do your own market research as well and make sure that the overall conclusions that were drawn aren't drawn from the overall list, which games is very, very heavy skewing, and not from the kids carry, which is the actual paying, purchasing behavior of parents. So that's something to learn from that. So, a little bit about the future. What are we going to be up to? And where does it leave us? Well, we've been in the news lately. And I can't say a lot about that, other than we most definitely have not been acquired by an Israeli hat maker. That is completely false. And I wish someone had called me so I could tell them that. But they didn't, so there you go. Interesting morning. Anyway, we're going to still stick with it. So these 3 choices that we made, so go for gender-neutral apps, focus on play, and sort of stick with a very honest business model, and sort of find that. I think that is very promising, but we also need to do some more things in order to sort of grow this business. So we've done a lot of partnerships, and that is something which has been relatively new to us, and we're gonna stick with that and keep doing that. I think there's a large market out there outside of the iPad world. It looks different, the demographics different, it's sold in different places, maybe even the user behavior is a little bit different. But it's very interesting. It's out there, and I don't think it's big enough now, and just thinking about emerging markets and sort of upcoming ecosystems, it's big enough to not completely overlook. And this is something that we spend more and more time on, just going deeper into other markets and together with other partners. So that's something. We're looking at consumer products. This is 3 tiny examples, 2 of which is from something that we call the Artist Play series. The one to the left is a series of tattoos with a Brooklyn tattoo artist called Virginia Elwood. The one to the right is a paper toy which we made together with an Argentinian street artist called Chew. And the one in the middle is just sort of funny, almost, socks, because it sounded funny that first we make apps and then we made socks. There was something funny about that. But we're looking at this space and just thinking, okay, so if the mobile and the tablet is the new first screen for kids, which I think that it is, then is it reasonable to assume that the new brands for kids are going to be built on these screens? I think that seems very, very reasonable. And taking that even further, is it reasonable to assume that kids are going to have an increased access to these smartphone tablet devices and going to be using them for entertainment and education purposes over the coming 5 to 10 years? Seems like an exceptionally safe bet. That being said, I don't think it's going to end there, just as it hasn't in any other channel before. So I think there's a lot to be learned just going outside of the App Store as well and building complementary businesses, and this is one of the things that we're going to be doing. We're also doing TV You Can Touch. This is our video project that we hired a guy which you may know, some of you, called Jay Milligan from Sesame Street. He was the creative director for basically what was Sesame Street's R&D unit, more or less. And we're building a video experience which is going and looking at the video in the same way as we looked at apps from the beginning, which is looking at it from a kid's perspective and thinking, if we have no legacy whatsoever, what can we then do? How can we design something which is without the sort of the confines and the legacies that come along with having maybe a large TV catalog? If we don't have that, and we just look at video for what it is and for what kids actually use it for, what then happens? And what we're finding is, of course, when kids get to choose themselves, they choose very, very different things than what's running on regular TV. They watch video which TV channels would never show, and they would never be considering that is not quality, that is awful stuff. I'm talking about things like Minecraft videos. Like, there's no Minecraft videos on Nickelodeon, or on Disney, or on Cartoon Network, because it's not considered to be high quality. And while that, with a very sort of traditional perspective, is true, of course, from a kid's perspective, that can be great. There's nothing wrong with that, and kids love these videos. I'm not saying they're all good, of course, but I'm saying that there's a lot of interesting thing that happens when video starts diverging from TV, because that's what's happening. The two are separating, and up until now, I think the TV broadcasters' idea of a video offering is TV as it was on the TV, on the internet with a play button. It's the same show, it's just in a browser. And that's a good start, it's better than having to watch it at a specific time. But video, as anyone who's been on YouTube or on Vine or anything, is turning into something quite different. And I think there's an interesting idea about what happens when you start with video as opposed to TV. What kind of product can you be making? This is going to be out in a beta version in the end of this year, and the first little idea of that. We're doing that in New York, and we're hiring, so keep that in mind. Finally, we're in a tricky business. Some people would argue that we don't really have an industry. It's an industry which is in between the toys and the games and the educational software and everything. And I think it's very, very tempting to just pivot very quickly and jump on new things as they come along. But the point of this was trying to show a little bit that while all these decisions that we made very early on make sense now when we've had a fair amount of success, at the time they didn't really seem to make a lot of sense at all. They were quite bold moves. And a lot of things were tricky to sort of justify. I have a friend of mine who's a futurist, and she said, you can't think the future, you have to sense it. And there's something in that. A lot of these things just felt right. And there's nothing to support that gender-neutral digital toys were going to sell better than Disney's equivalent of a hair salon. But it turns out that it did. And that's lovely. And that doesn't mean that every single decision that you make always ends up panning out. But sticking with it can actually prove to be pretty successful. Yeah. And those are three of our key decisions that help shape the company. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I can take some questions if you have anything. Yes?
I mean, ultimately your end user's children, but they don't have a Visa card. So now that you have sort of market share, it's not too hard to capitalize on reaching that audience that's going to actually purchase for their kids. So at the beginning, what did you do in regards to reaching the consumer base that you needed to reach in order to get them to recognize your product for their children?
I'm guessing you did not hear that question. Okay, so if I can condense the question a lot is, how did you get up and running when you didn't have a user base to start with, basically, if that's...
Yeah, basically.
We tried a lot of stuff. I think, I've been on the record saying, I've spent, it's probably millions of dollars by now, if not hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars trying all sorts of stuff that does not work. It's the prime thing we did is sort of focus on a product which is genuinely really good and that people want to recommend. That doesn't necessarily get you scale, but if you don't have that, nothing's going to work anyway afterwards. And one of the individual characteristics was just realizing that the app store is so immensely huge and that giving something away in the millions still leaves me a market of many, many, many millions, which is sort of counterintuitive. Like, well, if I give it away to many millions, how on earth am I going to sell something to them again? Or we had a portfolio approach with many different apps, or we still do, and we thought maybe we could sell them something else, but also we were realizing even the apps that we'd given away that had millions and millions of downloads, they're still being bought at a very high level because the market is expanding so rapidly. So we were like disproportionately generous, I'd say, and sort of doing sort of counterintuitive business decision, which I think in normal life, outside, and by normal I mean outside of the App Store, would not work, but that actually served us pretty well. And then we wasted money on a bunch of stuff that didn't work. Okay, yes?
What are your top 5 markets and what does Toca Boca mean?
Okay, top 5 markets and what does Toca Boca mean? Toca Boca is Spanish. It means Toca la Boca, means touch the mouth. It's from the logo. Originally, every app has a unique intro animation, and from the beginning, the intro animation was a game which you had to play with, so to touch the mouth and play the game. This is far too complicated, took too much time, get rid of that, scrap the game, turn it into an animation. But the name still sounds fun, it can be pronounced in many languages, it's easy to spell, all of those things. Top 5 markets, a little bit different from sales and downloads, but if you look at sales, it's generally speaking Anglo-Saxon markets, US market by far the biggest, UK, Australia, Canada, those kind of markets. If you look at downloads, other markets like China, Saudi Arabia, really strong. Yes?
So you said that the rumor about Israel is not true, but where are you headed? Are you headed to be independent? Because I saw a story that said the company was for sale for $100 million. Is that crazy as well?
100 million anyone?
Installment plan.
Yeah. I'll say this: we're owned by a 200-year-old media company that I worked for prior to starting this, and this has also been stated before. But not starting that as an independent company is, as is now rumored, the worst financial decision I have ever made, and is likely the worst financial that I will ever be able to make as well. But we're looking, of course, always for what's the best option for the company to grow. Like, that's what I'm looking for. I want the best possible prerequisites to build Toca Boca into a great brand for kids all over the world. So, and whatever that entails, I'm interested in doing that. So that's that more or less. Okay, one more. I think actually that was you.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thank you for sharing this information here. It was very interesting for me. I have a question regarding the kids. You mentioned that you do testing with kids. Do you recognize and see that the kids are reacting differently on the world? So South American are different than European kids or American kids? Or is the game concept worldwide working the same?
Yeah, so the question is basically, do we test with kids in different countries, and are there big differences geographically? We don't test that much geographically, unfortunately. Just it's practically very complicated to do that. But we have seen this, given that we're in the lower age range. Toca Boca is about 3 to 9, depending on the product. I think a lot of the differences happen when you start school, which is it's sort of 6, 7-ish, depending on where you are in the world. And a lot of the cultural context is added later on in life, which means that the similarities between 5-year-old from China, Germany, or Sweden is much, much closer than a 15-year-old or for that matter a 30-year-old. So we haven't had any indications that kids fundamentally think that apps should be different because of their cultural context. I have, however, seen parents think that. That is a big difference. So parents in different markets look at many of these apps and say, this is not, my sons would never play this. And like, you'd be amazed, because we've tested with a lot of boys, and I think you'd be surprised. But their idea of what their sons could do is very different from what we produce, and so therefore they'll never get the chance to play it, and therefore it so becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So in marketing and sort of how to skew it, that's when we need to sort of change the packaging and talk about different kind of attributes, I think, to a high degree than maybe we have done even. From a product perspective, I'm relatively confident that the products are obviously not for everyone, but I haven't seen any sort of geographic indication to sort of imply that one market is doing better than the others because the kids like it more. There's a lot of other questions, but I'll be around here in the break, so feel free to grab me. I'm happy
I'll
to.
make you a deal, actually.
Okay, a deal.
Okay, so we've got a few minutes. You've got until 10 after. I hope you all come back. You have a choice. We can stick around. You can stick around, some of you, if you want, and ask more questions if, everyone's cool with
Sure.
it. You can head out, move in and out as you will. But we'll take about another 5-10 more minutes if you want to stay. Otherwise, there's plenty of coffee out there, and there's lots of business cards to be shared. So that's going to be the goal today. At the end of the day, I want everybody to have at least 3, minimum 3 new ones, and I have plenty for you. So, all right. Yes. Yeah. 300. But yes, that's a good goal. But let's not scare people. Okay. So go ahead with the questions, and if you want coffee, go for coffee.
Okay, let's do this one then.
So you said you guys are experimenting with TV touch and moving into that space. From a technical perspective, that's a big transition from box apps and the type of stuff you guys are experimenting with. Like, do you consider that a pretty big risk in going to that kind of area where you're going to have a lot more infrastructure and hosting and things like that? Or are you guys going to be streaming multi-platform? You don't have to give up all the soft. It seems like it's pretty big from focused digital experiences to get into the multi-platform.
Yeah. So the question is it a big risk going into video space being a very different kind of experience, basically, and much more complex? Short answer is yes, it is a big risk, and it is. We've never really had a backend with 28 apps ever. We just put them out and you go to bed and nothing's going to go down. Servers are going to go down because there are no servers. It's lovely. It's very stress-free from sort of a DevOps perspective. But of course, this is a different kind of beast, and it's going to be much more complicated. On the other hand, video streaming has never been as cheap and as simple as it is today. And given another 12 months, it's going to be even cheaper and even simpler. So at least I think we're standing on the shoulders of giants and people that did a lot of hard work over the last maybe 10 years, which I was just in the fringe and other jobs involved in streaming, and it was an absolute nightmare and terrible and super expensive and completely inaccessible for anyone. But that's not quite the case now. But of course, we're not. In the same way, I can't out Disney. Also, I can't out Netflix. I'm not going to build a CDN cluster which is better than Netflix has. I have to bring something else to the market in order for that to work. So we're taking all of that into account. It has to work, of course, but I don't see the technical innovation of the streaming itself to be my sort of core offering. Yes, Warren.
Jordan, do you have any thoughts on Apple TV?
It seems as if 5 minutes from now people will be looking at Mac rumors instead of me. So I will not be offended about that.
Might your timing be perfect?
It might. That's the next slide, is my unveiling. I don't know, if the rumors are true, and there's been a lot of them, if they're opening up more app stores with more screens, I think that's generally speaking a very positive thing. More ecosystems to work with, and then we'll have to look at how kid-friendly the interface is itself. And that's the problem I have with the watch. I like the idea, it seems interesting, but I can't see kids wearing the watch in a foreseeable future, and I don't really like the remote control idea that parents are going to override and control what kids are doing. More from sort of a philosophical perspective, I don't think that's what parents should be doing, sort of turning on and off things for kids. And while they can do that, they can work well as a remote. From a kid's perspective, I didn't really see a lot of immediate wins there. If the Apple TV rumors are true, that, at least initially from the rumors, look a lot more promising, for sure. Yes?
How do you set your pricing? And how did you set your pricing initially for your first
Yeah. Okay, so the question is about pricing and how we set it. We set it by we did a lot of testing and price sensitivity. We can't, in Google Play you can change depending on markets, but in the App Store it's sort of consistent. So I think I would like to credit ourselves in being part of pushing the average price up a little bit. So now, generally speaking, it's $2.99. Going to $3.99 and $4.99, which we've tested, does not seem to yield more revenue. It's really about the goals that you have. If you want to be driving a big user base, you should obviously be free. And if you want to make a bit of a trade-off and have a lot of users but have some revenue, then you should probably choose a lower price. But for the product that we make and the amount of hours that we put into it, consumers seem to be fine with $2.99, which is, in outside of the App Store, absolutely nothing, and inside of the App Store, the premium luxury, which you can only have one a month, is $3. But that's just, again, that's the context that we're in, and we can't look past that. So it seems like $3 is some sort of premium, and the next level up is almost 7 or 8, and then I think you need to have a different kind of product for that to work.
One more. Sorry, I'm a bad guy.
So, Amazon, Toys R Us, they've made moves recently to get rid of gender differentiated toys. Do you see that continuing, happening, good thing?
I think the Target did a big announcement, and
Yeah.
they're not removing it on toys, but they're removing it no, they are removing it in toys,
Yeah.
sorry. And that was very positive. Again, that was certainly not on the horizon a few years ago when we sort of took this original stance. I think that's just validates that, yeah, there's a new kind of parent. That's the way I think of it. There's a new kind of parent that wants other things for their kids and thinks that maybe my kids are better off choosing their own life with whatever that entails.
But
And if they
despite that, what are your demographics on downloads, girls versus boys?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest.
Right.
We've never measured.
So is it self-selecting, I guess? Yeah.
I guess it is, but it's anecdotally at least, I know that a lot of boys are playing Hearthstone, for instance. And from the sales alone, I can see that I'm effectively doubling my market by offering it to boys and girls. In theory, it doesn't mean I'm getting 100% capture, but in theory, at least, I'm doubling my market. And sort of, that's probably a contributing factor to why we've done relatively well, I think, because there's just more kids that can actually find our apps and think that they're great. But yeah, when these big retailers make these moves, it's very encouraging, and I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it's going to keep on going. There's only one direction for this movement, and it's only a matter of speed. Okay, thanks a lot.